Hello and welcome to another one of our Brexit Explained videos. As anyone who's been following me on Instagram will be painfully aware, I've been away for the last week, so we've got some major catching up to do in this episode of Brexit Explained. So in this video we're going to cover what I've missed, and all of the Brexit news that's gone down while I've been away. So let's answer the questions: why is Parliament sitting again? What have they been saying? And what does all this mean for Brexit going forward? We're going to recap some of what's already been said this week, but it should be a full roundup of what we've missed. Before we answer any of those questions though, I want to let you know that the complete Season 2 pin badge collection is now available, which means you can now buy Australia, New Zealand, Estonia, Scotland, Belgium, the EU, the UK, Italy, Portugal, India and the UK and EU together. You can grab them separately or in a full pack. Also, some of Season 1 are still available in our store, as well as the complete Season 1 collection. So head over to tldrnews.co.uk/store to check that out. One other quick thing, I saw a few people in the comments confused about where their donations and profit from our sales goes. So if you want to learn more and find out why my holiday plans have nothing to do with your donations, then you can head over to tldrnews.co.uk/funding. So, as it turns out, this week wasn't exactly the ideal one to go away, with a whole lot of Brexit news landing in the last few days. This week began with the Supreme Court ruling on Johnson's prorogation. You'll remember that Boris Johnson announced a few weeks ago that he was planning to shut down Parliament for a few weeks in order to get his domestic agenda sorted and the Queen's speech organised in order to get the next parliamentary session started. You'll also remember us, and pretty much everyone else who's paying attention to politics, questioning this decision, given how long the prorogation was, and how suspiciously good the timing was, considering that shutting down Parliament stopped all discussions around Johnson's Brexit plan, until it was too late for them to get a new deal done. Well, it turned out that the Supreme Court was suspicious too. Many suspected that the court would steer clear of this issue, with some believing that the Supreme Court has a so-called allergy to getting involved with political matters. However, as Ben and Zach explained in our video on Wednesday, the Supreme Court upheld the Scottish Court's ruling, determining that the prorogation had indeed been unlawful. It's worth noting that this decision was completely unanimous, with all 11 Supreme Court justices agreeing with the decision. A link to the full ruling can be found in the description, and for a legal ruling, it's actually pretty readable. In fact, the justices even encouraged people to read the full decision. Anyway, this ruling brought an end to prorogation, with the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, almost immediately stating that the House of Commons should be brought back the following day. This whole issue completely destroyed Johnson's Brexit plans for the next few weeks. Instead of him holding talks, making speeches, and starting a general election campaign on the sly, Parliament has been returned to front and centre of the Brexit talks. This means that once again, they'll be able to scrutinise Johnson's plans and his government, exactly what many think he was trying to avoid. On top of that, it's done a big blow to his credibility. The UK Supreme Court ruled that he didn't have a justifiable reason for his prorogation. While they did stop one step short of calling him an outright liar, the court did determine that it was impossible to conclude on the evidence that there was any reason, let alone a good reason, to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks. This clearly does some damage to the very core of Johnson's platform, his ability to deliver Brexit, no ifs or buts. Anyway, the long and short of it is that my plan to go on holiday during prorogation failed, and Parliament was called back while I was away, and there was no shortage of things to cover when Parliament did reconvene. It's standard practice that on Wednesdays at midday, Parliament holds Prime Minister's Questions, or PMQs, where members of Parliament have the opportunity to grill the Prime Minister or fluff his ego, depending on which side of the aisle they fall on. However, this Wednesday when Parliament returned, there were no PMQs. This was at least partly because the Prime Minister was out the country at the United Nations General Assembly. Johnson was over there giving an unusual speech about Brexit, which we can dive into if you want. Be sure to comment below if that's a video you'd be interested in. Anyway, once Johnson did return to the House of Commons, he didn't waste time causing a stir, and from his opening remarks, it was clear that it was set to be a turbulent session. This could have been an opportunity for Johnson to reassert his respect for the judiciary, and ask Parliament to become more involved in Brexit than ever. Instead, upon his return, Johnson spent a few hours in front of the House of Commons debating Brexit and explaining his view on how things should progress. Things got worse for Johnson later that evening, when he came under fire for saying that the best way to honour Jo Cox's memory would be to get Brexit done. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, Jo Cox was an MP murdered in 2016 by a gardener with a history of mental health problems, who had attended English Defence League rallies. Cox was murdered at least partly because of her stance on Brexit, with her killer describing her as a traitor to white people. Johnson's remarks were in response to a question from Labour MP, a friend of Jo Cox, who asked Johnson to tone down his language because it was putting MPs' safety at risk. This was in the context of Johnson using the terms betrayal and surrender bill to describe the Benn bill. The MP claimed that his inflammatory language stokes tensions and put MPs' lives at risk. Johnson replied saying that this was humbug, before going on to say that the best way to honour Jo Cox's memory would be to get Brexit done. This was, no matter which side of the aisle you fall on, obviously a bad thing to say. Getting Brexit done goes directly against Cox's principles as an MP, and if nothing else, looks like a purely political response to a very personal question. Johnson had been standing in front of MPs for nearly 3 hours at that point, and seemed to be blustering a bit, which might go some way to explain his poor choice of words. Regardless though, he did refuse to apologise for them later in the evening, and Dominic Cummings, his chief advisor, said that he didn't understand why MPs were so surprised, and that the only way to calm the current tensions would be to get Brexit done. It's worth putting all this in context. According to lots of MPs, they've been subject to more threats since Brexit, and they're worried that what they consider to be Johnson's inflammatory language is making things worse. In fact, that same evening, Labour MP Jess Phillips's constituency office was attacked by a man shouting traitor, and another Labour MP, Cole Turner, approached Dominic Cummings to voice his concerns about the increased frequency of death threats. It's worth watching this encounter yourself to give you a sense of how tense things are getting in British politics. These are certainly unusual times, where a senior government figure is telling an MP that the best way to stop death threats is to support a government policy. It's hard to imagine death threats being used as leverage in a pre-Brexit world. So why are Johnson and Cummings committing to such angry language? Before we get into the possible motivations behind this tact, it's worth noting that this isn't just a Leaver problem. All across the political spectrum, language has been getting more extreme. Brexiteers use terms like traitor, treason and betrayal, and Remainers use language like fascist, dictator and coup. This is a bad thing for everyone, for really obvious reasons, and the question of who started it or who says nastier things is sort of irrelevant, or at least we think so. More interesting is why Johnson and Cummings are doubling down and even defending this inflammatory language. Well, it's likely because they're gearing up for an election, and they seem to think that this plays well with voters. Both sides know that their supporters are as locked into the Brexit debate as their politicians are. Looking at online discussions on both sides, it's easy to see where the lines are being drawn. People are looking less and less willing to compromise, and people view their opinion on Brexit as the ultimate decision maker. It wasn't long ago that debates would have been divided between those who supported Labour and those who backed the Conservatives. Now, more than ever, it's all down Brexit lines. Remainers versus Brexiteers. This kind of polarisation is obviously worrying for the unity of the whole country, but it's also incredibly worrying for the two main parties. The Conservatives obviously lie on the Brexit end of the spectrum, and Labour, despite so much indecision and back and forth, are more on the Remain end. The problem for both is that they're the more moderate sides of the debate. Brexiteers who get sick of the Conservative stance can abandon the Tories and choose to support Nigel Farage's Brexit party instead. While at the other end of the spectrum, if you think Labour are being too wishy-washy and failing to commit to a position, you could vote for the more hardline anti-Brexit Liberal Democrats. Both of the major parties are terrified of losing votes to these third parties, and looking at polling data, it's easy to see why. This means that both sides will do anything to protect their image and keep voters on side, which often includes using inflammatory language and divide and conquer strategies in order to help their electoral prospects. This leads to both sides escalating their language, and Johnson goading MPs in order to back up his position and shore up voter share. The battle lines have well and truly been drawn, and both sides seem unwilling to step down. With rhetoric increasing in intensity, it's looking more and more likely that Johnson will seek a no-deal Brexit, even despite the will of Parliament, and even if it means he has to break the law to make it happen. It also raises the stakes for a general election. The Conservatives need to scoop up a huge number of working-class, leave-voting Labour seats if they want a chance at a majority. The question is if this Brexiteer strategy will lead the Tories to electoral success, or be the beginning of the end for the party. Only time will tell, and we will of course keep you updated as it unfolds. So be sure to subscribe to our channel. You can also hit the bell icon if you want to be notified every time we release a video. And if you want more from us, you can find TLDR across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And if you want your name featured at the end of the videos, just like these people, then you can sign up to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.